Hello, it's time for Hour of History. This is your host, Stephen Bauman, and this week we've got something slightly different for you. This week's episode is brought to you by Printful. Printful is easy, on-demand online printing, fulfillment, and shipping. Just go to hourofhistory.com/Printful to see all the various custom products you can choose from for you or your business. There's mugs, sweatshirts, hats, swimwear, and a whole lot more. Go to hourofhistory.com/Printful, Printful, and there you can mock up merch with your own custom brand to sell from your store. hourofhistory.com/Printful. Make some cool stuff, support the show. Now this week, the history of our neighbors. I'm going back in the archives a little bit to pull out a really cool conversation I had when I was traveling through Cuba. Now, I went to Cuba for very specific reasons in order to do research that I had planned to do, follow a carefully planned itinerary. But once that was accomplished, once I had been to the conference, so on and so forth, I was able to spend a little more time out there and just, going out and talking to people. And when you open yourself to conversation and the people around us, you really start to see that history is all around us. In conversations with people that we may have not thought of talking to, in conversations with people who come up and talk with us, there's enormous power in oral history and people telling their own stories. And a lot of it, and great collections of oral history exist, a lot of it goes sort of unappreciated. A lot of it gets lost, and a lot of these stories just kind of ignored. Especially, one of the best places to collect oral histories is on a plane, and, earbuds and screens have basically made that something that you can't do anymore. People don't share their stories even though they're stuck in a tin cylinder for hours and hours. So the purpose of this episode is to kind of show not only insightful information from Cuban history, but also sort of the extraordinary things that happen when you just open yourself to conversation. Now, this conversation came out of me just sitting in the center of Santa Clara, Cuba, just soaking in the sun, and someone came up to me and she said, "You look like you are an American, and let's talk." And I said, "Great." And I said, "Do you mind if I record you?" And we talked for a long time. This was just a short segment of what we talked about. And it turned out that Christine had some amazing stories from her time growing up as a child in Havana, remembering and thinking about the revolution. Stuff that I don't necessarily write about, stuff that I won't necessarily use in an article or a book, but stuff that is super interesting and shows how connected neighbors like Cuba and the United States are, and how connected our stories are. Who would have thought, that this person who just talks to me in the park is thinking about her own life, which took place in a period that I write about. So it was an extraordinary conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening to Hour of History. Have a great one.
This is the Hour of History podcast. Our world, anytime, anyplace. And now from the Hour of History studio in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, your Hour of History starts right now.
In 1970, 73, more or less. 73.
So you taught history in Cuba?
In Cuba, modern and postmodern.
To high school?
Yes, well, it was like a MIT in the U.S. It was
Technical school.
Technical school.
And so tell me about Havana during World War II. So there was Germans, Americans.
There were Germans, Americans, British. There were different, colonies, because there were people that stayed in Cuba for some time. So when the Second World War burst out, they were caught in that situation. the Germans were finally taken to, just like they had the Jews in the,
concentration camps?
concentration camps. In Cuba, it was the other way around.
Oh.
Because Cuba belonged to the Allied forces. There was a real danger because there were some German submarines reaching this region. No, but this is not my invention.
Right.
Maybe more, but that I know of because I have read it. One on the Atlantic coast of Florida. They found out there was one there in those...
the Atlantic...
Close to Florida.
Yeah.
To the north of Havana, at a visible distance. And there were others in Brazil, also the Atlantic coast of Brazil.
So they took the Germans who had lived in Havana and they just made them go to certain areas.
They had to hold them together in certain areas, until and that's where they actually were until the war ended. I mean, after the entry of, because the Second World War is in different, occurred in different stages. So, and the Allied forces, it was in 1942 that actually entered into when...
So do you remember any Jewish refugees coming to Cuba?
I don't remember Jews.
There
must have been, because there is the Jewish society in Cuba. They have their Jewish, temple in Havana, which I think is quite, maybe it comes from that, from those days. Well, and...
So how did you end up in Santa Clara?
Oh, well, no, but that was...
different story.
No, it's part of the same story.
Okay.
It's just part of the same story. When I was very small, and my father, because of his work, he was related with Americans. My mother also already, on a different level, she was also related with Americans, which I really loved very, very much. And I used to spend even weekends with them and their children. So I actually started learning how to speak Spanish and English at the same time. Finally went to school also that English and Spanish.
And did you study English or did you study history? What did you study in school?
Oh no, but primary school. Primary.
Before, okay.
I studied high school in your country.
Oh, okay.
In Miami. Came back when I was going to be 15, because now comes a very interesting part of the question. My mother was very, very democratic. My father was a bit more... At the university, he had been a progressive student. He actually was progressive. Or progressive? Progressive. And he belonged to the left wing of the University of Havana, which always was a very politicized university, and revolutionaries actually armed for action against the
Batista regime.
And before, and had to flee from Cuba. That's with other groups of students, which later on were years after that. They studied in New York or finished studying, like my father. Oh, he has studied law here, but he studied economy at the University of New York.
NYU, yeah.
And, each one of them started, coming back when the revolution came into place, quite a few of them who had already known the U.S. because they had lived there for a while, they had to flee from other dictatorships. They became
like heroes, or at least like welcome back. Yeah.
Welcome back, and they took different positions in the revolutionary government. Of course, I met a few of them. Yes, I did, and a younger generation, because I'm talking about like my father's generation, but the ones I was more connected with were more or less my same generation, that is a more recent generation. We also lived in Miami. I used to already live there, but then also fleeing now from Batista, another dictatorship, another one, and not as many Cubans as now. There are at least 3 million Cubans in Miami, I've heard.
Yeah.
Is that a right
I think
number?
so. I mean,
more or less.
More or less.
More or less. All over the U.S.
All over.
New Jersey everywhere,
has a big
lot. And in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I have been told that there are 6 million Cuban exiles
all over the world.
All over the world. I don't know if that's more or less official. No, a Canadian told me that here.
It's probably true. Yeah.
It's probably true. And so now I have connected my generation with this other generation, and even the generation before, the generation of our grandfathers who had liberated Cuba from Spain, also had lived in the U.S., in New York.
So what about do you know your grandfathers?
Yes, when he returned, he was shot by the Spanish.
Oh, so he was a revolutionary who had been exiled to the U.S. So your family has just been going back and forth.
Back and forth, and me too. I'm the third generation, more or less, in this story. But of course, since it's not only my story, and there were other also involved, and that's what Cuban history is made of, more or less. This flow
back and forth.
Well, even Che Guevara, because he didn't come to Cuba directly. He have you seen the film Motorcycle Diaries? Well, him and this other guy, and he was just recently graduated. He had some connections in Miami, in Florida also. So he left for the U.S. But then I don't know. I haven't specialized in following his footsteps. And he finally ended in Mexico. And that's where he met Fidel Castro, who was trying to gather people and bring them in his expedition to Cuba.
Yeah.
But all that they did in the U.S. So there's a lot.
Yeah.
Cuban revolutionaries have always taken what they liked most of your country and tried to how do you say, to adapt it or put into practice whatever, and that's what is closer to my generation. Well, that's what they did also, and when the Cuban Revolution after the 1st of January here in Santa Clara, the last battle. I used to come to Santa Clara when I was in school, finishing school in Havana, and I knew some people here. I used to come on vacations. but no, I was in Havana when this battle was won.
And what did you think when you were in Havana and there was a battle happening in Santa
We
Clara?
already counted on that.
You
Because
already
we
knew it
knew
was gonna
we
happen.
were a very meticulous generation following everything because we were really interested in everything that was happening.
And how did you follow it? Did you listen to the radio?
On the radio.
Oh, okay.
With my godfather, a huge Second World War
Veteran.
veteran. It looked like a furniture, but it was a huge radio.
I see, the radio. No.
The radio in the era of the bulb technology, but it sounded great. It sounded with a bit of static, maybe. We used to listen to the Sierra Maestra every afternoon. Yes, it was
It was an exciting time.
It was very exciting.
Was it scary at all?
Well, in Havana, it was a bit, yes.
Yeah.
Because they carried out some sort of terrorism action. Acción was called Acción y Sabotaje, and because there were different
People, it was a war.
It was a war. It was a war going on.
Yeah.
But the difference in those days was that every social, everything that made the Cuban society, everybody, starting from the big capitalists up down to the bottom, everybody wanted that Batista had to, because it had become very, very scary, very, very repressive. Of course, he was trying to neutralize the
opposition.
The opposition, which was actually left into Fidel Castro's hands, and he was the one who actually. There were 2 or 3, maybe more organizations, but his was the most that people actually trusted most for that task, and he actually did it. It was only in 2 years, maybe
it's
even
fast.
It was so fast. But the whole of Cuban society. I was a student in those days. I was finishing high school, and we were also in not like the university guys armed in the street. A lot were killed because they actually were armed. They were
they were fighting. Yeah,
they were fighting, and we had a different style. We stopped going to classes for 1 week as protests.
Yeah,
but all of the high school students, the public schools and private schools, we
got together.
Because we had each classroom, we elected a delegate
a leader
or delegate to connect with the others. And when we were sure that everybody was, not to have an isolated action, but that
work together.
So that's what we did. And in that week, the university was also closed. Batista had to close it because that's where
it was.
The main leaders were in.
And then so you went to college right after the revolution.
As soon as the 1st of January, as I was telling you here, the battle was won. That evening, this is it's a version I have, which I don't doubt very much that they used to communicate. They were fighting, but you know that in fighting, when there is a structured armed war going on, there is some communication also possible with actually the enemy too. I don't know if you understand.
I do.
Because there is intelligence, and Batista's armed forces had their own military intelligence, and the rebel they also had to have some intelligence among the Batista army. Well, the last day here, It was in the evening. Well, you know that history. You know that story.
Yeah.
They got in touch with Havana and that they had won Santa Clara. That they would that they were going to go on to the rest of the country like the grandfathers did during the independence from Spain. They to follow that tradition, but they would prefer that there shouldn't be any more bloodshed.
Right.
I mean that
They wanted to end it.
to end it.
Yeah.
But there was a very interesting thing that I didn't know and that I actually have known lately because I do some tourist guiding every now and then. And I took it was a young tourist like you, I don't remember the nationality now. And we went to the derailed train, which was one of the main actions that took place that evening. And in those days, there was a lady that would guide the tourist groups and people taking them there. And she started talking. It was a very interesting, class on how that event took place and why they derailed it.
Mm-hmm.
But one interesting thing for me, it was like an illumination when I heard that. I said, well, really? Because the men that were the Batista soldiers that were supposed to be coming in that train were just maybe 50% of what should have actually reached. Among officials, which were the most that actually reached Santa Clara. But the other soldiers either, how do you say, when deserted?
Deserted. They left.
They left. They deserted from Havana even, did not come with the group on that train. And others who did not desert in Havana actually deserted on the way. That means that apart from normal communication through equipment, there was another type of communication going on. They already knew in Havana what was happening here. So they said, well, let's just give our... and they just didn't come. So only half of the men that were actually came here, and well, the train was derailed, and I suppose that they took the prisoners. But that's a story.
Yeah.
And then I have a version that is that Fidel Castro, they called or got in touch with Batista at where his headquarters were, and to tell them, like I was telling you, that this battle was won, that they were going to reach Havana anyway, and if he should still be there in Havana, they would do away with him completely, and that he should be there in the few days that it would take him to. So that's what Batista did. He fled that evening on his own plane with his family, his wife, his son he had, and they fled. I don't know, to Santo Domingo or Miami.
I think they went to Santo Domingo and they end up in Spain, right?
Ah, yes. He had millions and millions of millions. He had properties all over the island. He had
terrible.
the whole island. That's it. So well, that's it.
So like for you, like the programs they started running alphabet tests.
Yes.
Like Were you part of that? Like, I heard that some people in the city were sent to the countryside or volunteered to go to the countryside to go teach Spanish.
Well, no, that wasn't teach Spanish. That was a campaign. There was a lot of illiteracy in Cuba. So it was a campaign but that was a bit later.
A bit later, okay.
A bit later. No, between 1960 and 61. Because 61, it was the Bay of Pigs.
Yeah.
And then came the missile crisis in 1962 with Russia. But the Americans did a lot of try to
get him out of power, right? To not make sure the revolution didn't continue on.
Well, it's very complex,
right?
It's because even before the revolution was won with the armed movement, the Americans, for example, they made business with Batista.
Right.
That's why Batista was so rich. They made business with Batista, but also favored the revolutionaries. They did both.
Oh yeah, that's how they.
I don't think people think that is opportunistic, but I don't think so.
No,
To be on
and it's
both
what's
sides,
caused like a lot of the problems in Syria today. Like the same thing, we give weapons to both sides, and then our people are, shocked to hear what happens in Syria. But we're selling weapons to both sides.
But actually, the best side wins if it actually has for example, Batista's army was armed by.
Right. If it has the popular support.
But the other, it was actually really huge, and it finally had more
support.
Impact and more support. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, the American Mafia. That's what they did also. The three, because there was the hotels in Havana in those days. Santos, Traficante, this other one which was much more famous, the owner of Capri, which was, 2 or 3 of them, big capos, American capos, who had, and that's what they did also. They used to do business with Batista, but I know because...
you were there?
No, I wasn't there, but I finally knew people who had been protected by American Mafia. They protected revolutionaries. Like, for example, revolutionaries running away from Batista's police. They would have been killed, but they decided to protect a few of them. They sympathized also with their plight. So that's
it's interesting. Thanks for listening to this presentation by Hour of History. It is kind of extraordinary what we see and what we hear when we open our eyes and open our ears to conversations around us. And with the holiday season coming up, fast approaching, I urge you to maybe ask an uncomfortable question or two, just so you can get people to talk about their past a little bit, and so you can become an oral historian too and learn and appreciate these rich stories that sort of bring together our world and bring together our experience, because there are infinite number of these great stories out there. All you have to do sometimes is just sit on a park bench and listen. So thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. And I'll see you next week on the Hour of History. So long.
Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out our recommendations page at hourofhistory.com/recs. That's hourofhistory.com/RECS. There you'll find links to the books mentioned during the podcast, and if you choose to purchase one, you'll be supporting the podcast in the process. And if you still haven't gotten your fill of the Hour of History, make sure you head over to the Hour of History blog, found at hourofhistory.com/blog, with articles being released fairly often on topics relating to those covered in the podcast as well as others. With that, we conclude this episode and hope to have you back for the next one. Take care, and again, thanks for listening to the Hour of History podcast.